Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers, a paranormal podcast where I read true stories of people's encounters with the strange and unexplained. No comedy, skepticism, or gore, only 100% true spooky tales. First, a warm thank you to my new Patreon subscribers, Matt, Nikki, Paul, Terry, Lindsay, and Brizelda. Thank you so much for your support. It helps keep the podcast going. I'd also like to invite you to join the Patreon either as a paid or free user. I plan on posting some episode inspiration notes and would like to create a community where we can discuss all things spooky in one place. Otherwise, please leave a rating and review of the podcast, but best of all, keep listening and keep sharing with your paranormally inclined friends and family. As summer starts to fade and the school year begins in my neck of the woods, classrooms are filling with the sounds of footsteps, laughter, and the rustle of notebooks. But not all noises in these halls are made by the living. Schools and campuses have long been magnets for paranormal activity. Built on old battlegrounds, former hospitals, or sites with dark pasts, these institutions often hold more than just academic history. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, my father is a school custodian, and many times as a young girl, I'd be able to come and see him at the schools after dark. And I can attest it is indeed one of the creepiest things to walk down a school hallway with your steps echoing behind you and photos of graduates of years past peering down at you, with only the glow of the fire exit to light your way. In this episode, I'm reading true stories of people who encounter the paranormal either in schools or university campuses, where school spirit isn't just a figure of speech. Our first story is another listener-submitted story. AnneMarie shared her story of her experience at her grandparents' haunted house. Thank you so much, AnneMarie, for sharing your story with me and for always supporting me on Instagram. I always appreciate your support, and I'm so happy to be able to share your story. Now, let's not waste any more time. So turn down the lights, get comfortable, and listen in. The Old Schoolhouse, submitted by AnneMarie. My stories concentrate around a house that my grandparents lived in, the Old Schoolhouse in the northeast of England. And these are secondhand stories from my grandparents, aunts, and my mom. My grandfather was a caretaker of 2 schools, and as a part of his job, he got a house. Imagine that. The house was between the 2 schools. One was a nursery and the other a primary school. He was responsible for looking after them both. My grandparents lived in the house with 4 of their 7 children, who would have been slightly older kids around the ages of 12. The current house was built in the 1900s, but the original house was dated to the 1600s until its demolition in 1909, so it's on a pretty old site. Various strange things happened, but I shall share the scariest ones with you. One evening, my grandfather had gone to bed early, and as my grandmother was out, he went to bed alone. He awoke at 11 p.m. to a hand wrapping around his body, cuddling him. He turned around to kiss my grandmother goodnight, thinking she must have just gotten home, but instead found her space empty and cold. He leapt out of the bed, shouting bloody hell, and about 10 minutes later, my grandmother came home. Another evening, my poor grandfather was alone in the house again. Grandmother was out and the kids were at various friends' houses. It was a blustery, wintry night, and the old doors in the house kept rattling and annoying him. He decided, being the sort of caretaker that he was, to go around and check each door, making sure it was shut properly. He got to the last door and uttered, "Now try and bang that, you bastards." And every single door banged, one after another, throughout the house. One morning, my grandmother was up before everyone else and came down to the kitchen to all the cupboard doors and drawers open, including all the crockery and cutlery scattered all over the floor. It was quite common for this to happen, and my aunts told me that the cutlery would jump around on its own as well. My uncle's room was the worst. although no one knew about it until he left for the Navy. My mom moved into his room the night he left, finally getting her own room for the first time and very excited. However, she only lasted half the night. She went to sleep easily enough, but was woken to her covers falling off. She grabbed them back and drifted off to sleep, only for it to happen again. But this time, with such force that the covers were ripped from her hands and she awoke instantly. Within a few minutes of that happening, her cupboard door started to open and the curtains started to rise up and down as if a pair of unseen hands were holding them aloft. She ran screaming from the room, never to return. My auntie tried to stay in there as well, as she thought my mom was exaggerating and she really wanted her own room. But the same thing happened to her. When they asked my uncle if it had happened to him, he said it had always happened, but he just told it to shut up and leave him alone, and it generally did. However, my uncle has always been quite open to spirits, and lots of strange things have happened to him over the years, but he's too pragmatic to take any notice or make a fuss. 2 of the children did see a spirit, but only once. They were on their way up the stairs and suddenly felt icy cold. They both looked up at the same time to see the white shadowy shape of a woman at the top of the stairs. She then slowly dissipated. The children were convinced that it was a ghost of a murdered maid from ye olden days and did lots of library detective work, finding out that the site used to be owned by the Duke of Northumberland. So convinced that it was a murder that they tried to persuade my grandmother to let them dig up the kitchen floor. Obviously, grandmother rejected this idea completely. One final story involves me. When I was about 3 or 4, I was playing in the old schoolhouse, chatting away as if there was someone there. My grandmother asked who I was talking to, and I answered, "Little Chicken." She told me that her blood ran cold at this point, as that was the nickname of her mother, my great-grandmother, who had been dead for many years. The reason for the nickname was due to her being really small, with tiny feet, and she used to walk fast like a little chicken. Apparently, I continued to chat to my playmate for about a year after that, but I slowly stopped as I got older, and I think it's most likely because I was unable to see her as I grew up. No Man Hallway, submitted by listener Tiny Dooms. My freshman year of college, I attended a small, women-only liberal arts college in Virginia. It's gone co-ed in the last few years, but when I was attending, it wasn't. I'm from California and was a little worried about being alone on my own, so far from home, so I requested a room in the dorm's No Man Hallway. The other residents were a bunch of girls like me, mostly freshmen, all of us from religious or otherwise conservative households. The only men allowed on the hallway, besides the occasional father moving things in and out for his daughter, were maintenance workers, and they had to announce themselves by bellowing, "Man on the hall," whenever they came up. From day one, something was wrong with that hallway. It started with an eerie feeling of being watched, and escalated into things like radios in the showers in the communal bathroom at the end of the hall being turned on and off, apparently of their own free will. Things being moved around girls' rooms, that kind of thing. Typical haunting stuff. It started out as very benign, and we all joked about it. How we had representatives of the 3 major religions on the hall, and at least one of us should be able to perform an exorcism if need be. So September and most of October passed with general activity, and then things began to get creepy. The entire hall was woken in the middle of the night when someone ran up and down, banging on every door. You'd walk into the bathroom to find every tap in the sinks spewing hot water, full blast. Radios that had never acted up before would be turned on, and whatever it was started getting nasty. It would pull our hair when we were out in the hall talking, or push us in the bathroom. Nothing terrifying, but definitely alarming. And worse, it moved out of the hallway and bathroom and started coming into our bedrooms, more and more. I was really scared, but trying to be brave and not telling my family about the ghost. But my mom got the story out of me one night when we were talking on the phone, and I admitted to being scared. My mom is pretty sensitive to spirits, and she was alarmed. I tried to play it off as if it was no big deal and went about my college life. The next day, I came back to the dorm from class, walked into my bedroom, and there was a man sitting in my desk chair. He was not a flesh and blood man. He was more of a shadow, an outline, but I could see him clearly. I think I stood in my doorway for about a year and a half staring at him until he raised a hand at me. Raised a hand like he was greeting me, inviting me in. I freaked out and ran to the bathroom where all the showers were running. There was no one else home on the hallway. From that day on, this man was always there, sitting in my room. If I was bopping around with my iPod, I'd see him sitting on my chair on my bed. If I needed the chair, he'd move to the desk or sometimes to my roommate's bed. I never saw him clearly. He was always a shape, an outline, more an impression than anything else. But he was there, and he was real. And eventually, I started to call him John. He was tall and kind of thin, and he gave me the impression of an older gentleman who wore cardigans and a tie like Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch. I liked John. Because here's the thing. From the day John arrived in my dorm room, whatever was in the hallway left me alone. It would still run around and bang on every door, except mine. It would mess around with everyone's stuff, except mine and my roommates. Everyone else's phone would ring and have no one on their end, but never mine. Other girls' food would disappear from the communal fridge or end up spattered in the sink. Some girls would find their clothes tampered with. Others' doors would find their posters and things messed up since we all decorated our front door. My room? Nothing. I didn't mention John to anyone. I was having a rough time. My roommate and I were fighting, and I was realizing that I didn't really like college all that much. One night, around Thanksgiving, some friends and I watched The Ring as an activity, and then they dropped me back at the dorm. And I just felt sick walking in, like I was being watched. All the way down that long hallway to my room, I could feel whatever was there watching me, waiting. All of the lights were on, but I was so scared that I thought I was going to cry. I made it into my room, curled up in my bed. My roommate was gone for the weekend, and just wished that I was home. I could hear the thing outside running up and down the hallway. I had just watched a terrifying movie. I was 18 and small and scared. I got my blankets up around me and just cried. After a while, I realized I wasn't alone. My personal ghost was sitting on the bed with me, and somehow I knew that as long as he was there, whatever was in the hall, and there had been some interdenominational talk about getting this place blessed, would not come into my room and would not hurt me. For whatever reason, John was protecting me. On my last morning at the college, I got up at 4 o'clock to meet a taxi to take me to the airport. I got dressed, ate a bowl of cereal in the tiny communal kitchen, put the empty bowl into the sink, walked back to my room to bring my suitcase down to the elevator. As I waited for the elevator, something in the kitchen behind me exploded. I walked over to the doorway and looked in. An egg in a pot had been heated until it cracked. The ring on the stove that it stood on was red hot. I'd been standing in the kitchen 3 minutes before, and there hadn't been anything on the stove. No one else was awake. I turned back to the elevator and saw John standing next to my staircase. The doors opened and we walked inside, and he was with me all the way across campus to the taxi by the front doors of the main building. I was so relieved to leave that place behind me as I drove away, though at that point I was still planning on returning in January, which I didn't. At home in California, I told my mom everything. From my disappointment in the college as a whole to the haunting. I told her about the thing in the hallway and about how I never came into my room after my own personal guardian angel showed up. I described how he would sit in my chair and keep watch, and she laughed. "Sounds like my great-granddad," she'd said. When I was little, he'd always keep an eye on us kids. He didn't like bullies, and he had no patience at all with the supernatural. He believed in it, but he didn't like it haunting us. That entire side of my mom's family are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they all believe in and had experience with ghosts. My great-grandfather, who I'd never even heard of, apparently had no problem with performing exorcisms or casting out spirits, and was widely believed to be good at it. He was fiercely protective of his family as well. He died when my mom was a teenager in the late 1960s, and his name was John. The Finishing School. Submitted by user Softown. In the late 90s, we moved into a waterfront property on an island directly across from Seattle. There was an aging pier at the end of our road, and across from us was a retirement home which used to be a boarding school. The original dormitory building still stood, now abandoned, and next to that was an empty and very dilapidated bungalow. My friends and I decided to explore, figuring we were pre-teen detectives. Through the shattered windows on the ground floor of the dorms, we could just make out what looked like broken plates and a stage in the distance. I wanted to climb in since I was really into theater, but one of the other girls started getting really agitated. "I don't think we should do this, guys. I have a really bad feeling." We couldn't find another way in. All the doors were locked and all the windows had a drop down. We had better luck with the bungalow, finding the door off its hinges. Inside, it looked like there had been a fire or something. The walls were largely studs, every surface was black, and there were massive holes in the floor. The agitated girl did not come in with us, which was probably for the best. The whole place had this weird, stale and stifling air in it. I don't really know how else to describe it than thick. Through the windows from outside, we'd been able to see a room that looked relatively new with a clean, shiny coat of periwinkle blue paint on the walls. Yet walking around the house, which wasn't big, we simply couldn't figure out where the room was. There were no doors in the wall that should have been shared with it, and when we went to look outside again, we realized we couldn't actually see any doors from within the blue room either. That night, everyone slept at my house. Around 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up feeling like I couldn't breathe. Like someone was sitting on my chest, and I couldn't move. I was sharing the bed with one of my friends and the others on the floor, but then, when I managed to turn my body onto my right side, I saw a 7th girl sitting on my dresser. There were only 6 of us. She had dark hair and was wearing a black dress, similar to a pinafore, and was tapping her booted heels against my drawers. I guess that jerked me awake properly because I was able to sit bolt upright, close my eyes, and shake my head. And when I looked again, she was gone. I figured I'd given myself a nightmare. A couple of days later, I met up with my friends at the Island Historical Museum to do some more digging. It turned out that the boarding school had been founded in the 1870s as a sort of all-girls finishing school, and the pier at the end of the road used to be one of the main transport links over the city. My house stood on what used to be called the playing fields, and the bungalow was the groundskeeper's house. Though unfortunately we couldn't find any blueprints to explain the elusive blue room. What we did find, however, was a pretty terrifying photograph from the 1890s. The black and white school portrait showed the 2 rows of pretty girls in white dresses sat in front of the dormitory building. A couple of lines of text under the image listed all the names of the students in order, except for one. In the front row, there was a girl looking down at her foot, which was being stepped on by the girl next to her. The girl next to her? Dark hair, wearing a black dress and boots. And her name? Girl unknown. After we moved, I started going back to those buildings to hang out as a rebellious teen, but never went in again. Once I got a cell phone and noticed there was no service at the bungalow or dorms and stopped going completely. Years later, my brother went into the house with some friends, but now refuses to ever go back either. He swears they heard screaming from inside the walls. Art School, submitted by user Gloria Frankensteinum. I went to art school and got to know almost everybody, and that was a great way to get the good gossip on all the ghosts on our fairly haunted campus. The ghost people mentioned the most, and these are people who were friends with me but not friends with each other, was the moaning Myrtle in one of the girls' bathrooms. Some people only ever heard her, crying, always. Some people saw something, but the best story was one that my friend told me. This friend was like me in the sense that she loved the tight-knit community and got along well with everyone. One very late night, she was up, very, very late, working on a painting and had to go to the bathroom. We're talking 3 a.m. when the campus and studios are almost entirely deserted. She's in the stall, and she hears someone in the stall next to her. And being a wonderful busybody, she peers down to see whose shoes are there so she can figure out who she's working with so late so they can chat or go get snacks or something. And there's no shoes. She told me there was some kind of shadowy type of shape and that she also realized that she never actually heard anyone come in. And all the stall doors had been open when she went in. I only ever used this windowless bathroom to wash my hands and pretty much only with a friend. I had a different late-night hunt. You could find me most nights in the print shop. Print shops are kind of dangerous, so undergrads had to use a buddy system so that someone would be there if any injuries occurred. One night, I'm using the intaglio press while my friend is over in the screen printing area. She leaves to go to the bathroom, and I'm in the huge print shop, now completely alone. It didn't even occur to me to be spooked, because this was, and will always be, my happy place. I was examining one of my proofs with great focus and concentration when I heard the unmistakable sound of someone slapping the side of a massive drying rack behind me. This was an intentional and very loud noise, and there was no one there to do it. It was very startling, and it also felt like someone was watching me. I power walked over to my stuff and started packing up, and my friend was also ready to go when she heard my story. Long after I had this experience, I was talking to an MFA, grilling her to see if she had any spooky stories to share. She told me that the print shop that we were both sitting in was in fact haunted. One night, she was there alone. MFAs did not have to use the buddy system and could apply and be given keys to come and go as they pleased. And she kept hearing footsteps pacing in the area behind her. This woman is no stranger to ghosts and spooky things, so she said something like, "I'm working and will continue to work," and kept at her work. The footsteps got louder and louder until they were stomps, so loud that she looked up in surprise and saw just the apparition of a head floating about 6 or so feet off the ground, moving like it would if it were attached to a walking body. She was so scared she phoned a friend to talk to while she packed up and left. I asked her if she had ever heard about the man who had been decapitated in the building shortly before the school opened. She had no idea what I was talking about. Apparently, some homeless people had been living in the building when it was vacant, and one man wouldn't leave. The day the construction to convert the building to a school began, he tried to jump off one of the higher floors, but because of the height and the impact of his jump, he unfortunately was decapitated. I believe that's who she saw that night. All of my time at the school, I walked around thinking respectful thoughts towards any of the spirits in my vicinity. I often thought there were lots of kind and gentle ghosts, especially in the older building with a deep and rich history. Sometimes I wondered if the great artists and teachers of the past would stand at the shoulder of struggling students and radiate encouraging vibes. If I had to be a ghost, that's exactly the haunting I would do, and precisely where I would do it. Ancient Indian Burial Ground, submitted by user TM. I was working in a northernish reserve school in Alberta back in the late 90s. Everything in this world is political, and First Nation reserves are no exception. So when the gym teacher George came to us on a cold October day and said he needed to move, we all thought it was for political reasons and immediately wanted the dirt. He and his family had been one of the lucky ones that had gotten a teacherage home at a very reduced rate, which meant he didn't need to drive the 40 minutes or so from any of the surrounding communities. He insisted it wasn't political. After a moment of silence, he added that his trailer behind the school was haunted. We all stared at him, and the stories came out in drips and drabs, and then in torrents. He and his wife had been tormented for over a week. It had all started when his little dog started to stare at their porch. When they looked outside, 2 black dogs were just sitting there. This wasn't unusual. Most reserves had feral or semi-feral dogs roaming around, but when they turned back to the window, both their kids were pointing at the corner, where nothing was there. The thing was, though, the older of the 2 was 18 months, and the younger was only 6 months. George was well over 6 feet, his wife was barely 5 feet, and his 2 kids were knee-high or lower. But when he looked at the mirror that he'd set up for himself, there were children's handprints all over them. The kids still pointed at nothing, but they ignored it until the night when he and his wife went to bed at the same time and had the same dream. Dead people came to them and told them not to build in here. Because while all of this was going on, the reserve was midway through planning an extension of the school. It wasn't going to be built on an ancient Indian burial ground, but we were told that the Cree band did bury their dead in a line from the highest hill to the lake the reserve was named after. And yes, the school was on that line. The Cree teacher, when she heard the story, just shook her head and said it was typical that the dead would come and talk to Monias, or white people. If I was making this up, this is where I'd give a climax to the story that somehow made sense to all of this. But George and his family found a house in the closest town, and the elders smudged the trailer. It was believed that the dead walked from the time the ground froze and the first snowfall, and that October certainly fit this. As the year passed, we became aware of more and more stories about the school. We were told never to be at the school alone, and the one teacher who had permission to do so brought her 2 large dogs. When they stood up and growled at the door to her classroom, she packed everything up and went home. I'd only been at the school once without anyone else in the building. I'd left a phone number on my desk that I needed, so despite it being a Saturday, I made the drive to go get it. I didn't see anything, and the sound of the children playing that I swore I heard from the gym could have just been white noise did freak me out so much that when I had to use the washroom before I left, I did so with the door open because it felt less oppressive that way. That reservation had a fairly dark history. Unlike American history, massacres between the settlers and the First Nation people could be counted on one hand, and this had been the site of a terrible one. The backlash from the government had left a lot of people starving through the winter, and the tribe that lived on the reserve hadn't even been a part of the killing. When summer came, I took another position elsewhere and moved on with my life. But I'll never forget how uncomfortable George's face was when he tried to explain why he had to move. And that's all for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I will be releasing a part 2 of this episode on Patreon as this month's bonus episode, so make sure to check that out if you get a chance. For $3 a month, you get 2 bonus episodes, early access, and ad-free episodes as well. Next episode, I'm going to be telling true stories of people who encountered ghosts as children or whose children encountered ghosts. So if you have any experiences with that, I'd love to hear it. Until then, I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you soon.